They thought I was poor and forced a prenup, and now that I'm far richer than them, they're demanding I end it. But their family saw me as financially unstable. They kept reminding me how important it was to protect their family assets. In their eyes, I'd always be the one struggling to catch up. So, they insisted on a prenup, one they thought would protect their money from me, the poor outsider. I agreed, even though it hurt. I just wanted to make them feel comfortable and keep the peace. But life has a funny way of working out. Fast forward a few years, and now, I've built something of my own. Something bigger than they ever expected. And here's the twist. Now they're the ones asking me to tear up that prenup they forced me to sign. When we first met, things were perfect. We clicked immediately, shared the same dreams, and saw a future together from early on. Dating was exciting, and I quickly knew this was the person I wanted to marry. It wasn't long before we got engaged, and I felt like I was on top of the world, ready to start this new chapter of life together. But soon after the engagement, things changed a bit. My future in-laws began showing a different side. They were friendly, but I started picking up on subtle comments here and there. Questions about my job would come up a lot more often, along with hints about my future plans. It seemed innocent at first, but over time, it became clear they were questioning my career and wondering if I could provide the kind of lifestyle they expected for their child. Then, one evening, my in-laws sat me down for what felt like a serious talk. They told me that they had something to discuss before we moved forward with wedding planning. I remember feeling a bit nervous, not really sure what to expect. That's when they told me they wanted me to sign a prenup. They said it was to protect the family assets and that it was just something they felt they had to do. They assured me that it was nothing personal, just a family formality. But to me, it felt very personal. I was caught off guard. Here I was, engaged and ready to start a life with the person I loved. But now, it felt like I was on trial. This idea of a prenup shook me, because deep down, it made me feel like they didn't see me as part of their family, like I wasn't good enough. I couldn't help but feel hurt, and I wondered if they thought I was marrying for money. All my hard work and genuine intentions suddenly felt questioned. I didn't want to sign it. In my mind, marriage was supposed to be about trust and partnership, not about protecting assets. But I also knew that pushing back would likely create tension, maybe even put a wedge between me and the family. I loved my fiancée, and I didn't want anything to come between us, especially with the wedding plans underway. So, reluctantly, I signed it. I told myself it was just a piece of paper, and that it didn't change anything between me and my partner. I wanted to prove to them that my intentions were pure, that I wasn't after anyone's money. It hurt, but I thought that if this would finally make them accept me, it was worth it. Little did they know that prenup wouldn't be as protective as they'd hoped. Life was about to change in ways none of us expected. After signing that prenup, something changed in me. It was like a fire had been lit. I felt this huge drive to prove myself, not just to them, but to myself. I wanted to show that I could build a stable and successful life without needing anyone's help. So, I threw myself into my work. I took on every project I could, worked late nights, and pushed harder than ever. There were days when I barely slept, constantly pushing myself to go further. It wasn't easy, but I stayed focused, determined to make something of myself. As time went on, my hard work started paying off. I began landing bigger projects, and people started to notice. Soon, opportunities I'd never dreamed of began coming my way. I got promoted, took on new roles, and even started exploring side businesses. Each small success made me push even harder. My confidence grew, and I could see my finances starting to improve. Then, there was a real turning point. I landed a major deal that changed everything. Suddenly, I had the kind of financial freedom that felt surreal. I wasn't just getting by, I was thriving. For the first time, I realized I had become wealthier than I'd ever expected, even wealthier than my in-laws. It was a strange feeling, thinking back to how they'd once looked down on me. This success didn't happen overnight. It took years of sacrifice and staying focused. But eventually, I reached a point where I was financially independent and didn't need to rely on anyone. And now, ironically, I was in a position where my finances overshadowed theirs. That prenup they'd insisted on, it didn't protect them as much as they'd thought. And now, everything had flipped. I had built something real, and I was finally able to stand on my own. Over time, my success started to catch up with me. It wasn't like I was trying to make a big deal out of it. I wasn't the type to boast or show off. But when things started to turn around for me, when I finally had the financial freedom I'd worked so hard for, people started noticing. I made a few key purchases, like a new house in a neighborhood I'd always dreamed about, and investments that seemed to pay off. I suppose it was a combination of those things, along with some posts on social media, that caught my in-laws' attention. At first, I didn't get any calls or comments. I figured they were probably still processing everything. But as time went on, I started feeling a shift. I'd catch them making small, pointed remarks when we were together. They'd casually ask about my house, my business, or even the vacations I'd been taking. It was clear that they had noticed the change, and I'm sure they were shocked at how much I had achieved. One evening, they invited me over for dinner, and I thought it would be a normal family gathering. We were chatting, catching up on life, when the conversation slowly veered in a direction I wasn't expecting. They were all smiles, but there was something in their eyes that told me they weren't just interested in talking about my new success. They wanted something. After a few minutes, my father-in-law looked at me, almost as if he was hesitating, and then casually said, "You know, we've been talking about that prenup you signed." I froze for a second. Was this really happening? I had never expected them to bring it up, let alone ask me to end it. Then my mother-in-law chimed in. "Now that things have changed, don't you think it's time to get rid of it? It's really just outdated now, don't you think?" They both exchanged a look, clearly in agreement. They said the prenup felt unnecessary, especially now that I was more financially stable. It was almost like they expected me to just agree to it, to act like everything had been fine all along. "You've done so well for yourself, so it just seems unnecessary now," they continued, their voices almost pleading. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. It wasn't just the fact that they were asking me to dissolve the prenup, it was the sheer nerve of it all. These were the same people who had pushed me to sign it in the first place, treating me like I was some kind of liability. They had assumed I'd never be able to stand on my own, that I was too financially insecure to ever build anything. And now, after everything, they wanted me to just forget about it, as if none of that ever happened. I sat there for a moment, trying to process everything. It was a strange mix of feelings that hit me all at once. There was a sense of satisfaction, even pride. After all the hard work, the sleepless nights, and the doubts, I had done it. I was in a position now where I was no longer the one being judged or doubted. But then, there was a deep sense of betrayal. The very people who had questioned me, who had pushed me into a corner with that prenup, were now acting like they were on my side, like we were all family. The irony of it was almost too much to handle. I felt my chest tighten as I thought about how they'd treated me all those years ago. They'd made it clear they didn't think I was good enough, that I'd never amount to anything. And now, they wanted me to erase all of that by simply tearing up the prenup they demanded. It felt like they were trying to rewrite history, like my struggle had meant nothing, like my success wasn't earned. I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how manipulative the situation was. They weren't asking because they were concerned about me or because they thought it was the right thing to do. No, they were asking because they wanted to protect themselves. They had seen how well I was doing, and now they were afraid that their family wealth might be at risk. They probably thought that if I didn't need the prenup anymore, then I would no longer have any incentive to protect myself if something went wrong. But what struck me most was how they tried to make it sound so reasonable. They acted like it was all in good faith, like they were just trying to be supportive. "You've built something of your own now," they said. "You don't need it anymore." It felt like a slap in the face. It was like they were saying, "Now that you're successful, we can finally treat you like one of us." But I didn't forget the past. I wasn't going to let them erase what had happened just because things were different now. I wasn't sure how to respond right away. I didn't want to lash out, but I was furious inside. I could feel my heart pounding, the anger bubbling up. I wanted to tell them how ridiculous they were being, how after everything they had put me through, now they were asking for my trust. I wanted to remind them of all the little ways they had doubted me, questioned me, made me feel like I was never good enough. But instead, I took a deep breath and kept my cool. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me. I had fought so hard to get where I was, and I wasn't going to give in to their pressure now. So I just looked at them calmly and said, "I'm not going to do that." I wasn't angry, but I wasn't going to back down either. I had worked too hard for too long, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The silence in the room was thick, and for a moment, no one knew what to say. I could see the surprise in their eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to play along with their little game. But it didn't matter. I had already made up my mind. This wasn't about a piece of paper or some family formality. It was about respect. And if they couldn't offer that, then I had no reason to listen to them. After that dinner, the tension only grew. The conversation with my in-laws wasn't the end of it. In fact, it was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. I could feel the pressure mounting from every side. It wasn't just my in-laws anymore. They began involving my spouse, trying to make her feel guilty about the prenup. They'd make comments like, "You're family now, don't you want everything to be equal?" Or, "It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't matter anymore, does it?" I could tell they were trying to put her in a tough spot. Like it was her fault that we had this barrier between us. The pressure from them started to feel suffocating. My mother-in-law, in particular, would call me repeatedly, trying to convince me to reconsider. "Think about what's best for your family," she'd say. But it felt less like concern and more like manipulation. Every time she called, she'd remind me of how things used to be, when I was still struggling to make ends meet, how we thought it was for the best back then. But now, everything had changed. She kept saying that the prenup wasn't needed anymore, that it was holding us back. I could see how my spouse was caught in the middle of all this. She was torn between supporting me and wanting to please her family. One night, we had a huge argument about it. She came home, visibly upset, after another conversation with her parents. "Why don't you just let it go?" she asked me. "It's causing so much tension between us, and I don't want to keep fighting with my family." I could tell she was struggling, and it hurt me to see her so torn. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore how the pressure was building from both sides. I tried to explain to her that I wasn't holding on to the prenup just for the sake of it. It wasn't about the money or the assets. It was about respect. I had worked so hard to build my life, my career, and I wasn't going to let anyone erase that or make me feel like I was somehow less than. I knew I had to stay true to my principles, no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone. As the days went on, I started feeling the weight of this situation more and more. The calls from my in-laws didn't stop, and I knew they were pressuring my spouse as well. I could hear her talking to them on the phone, trying to reason with them, but I could also hear their tone, the way they made her feel like she was betraying them by supporting me. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was downright exhausting. The constant back and forth, the guilt-tripping, the hints that I was being stubborn, it was all too much. But through all of it, I knew I had to stay firm. I took some time to process everything, to really think about what this prenup meant, not just in terms of money or legalities, but in terms of respect. I realized that this wasn't just about a document, it was about my self-worth. When I signed that prenup, I was in a vulnerable place, uncertain about my future and trying to make everyone happy. But now I wasn't that person anymore. I had built my life from the ground up, and I wasn't going to let anyone tell me I didn't deserve to protect myself, my assets, or my future. In the end, I made the decision to stand my ground. I wasn't going to dissolve the prenup. The way I saw it, it wasn't just about the money. It was about maintaining my dignity and protecting my hard-earned success. I had done everything the right way, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how close they were, undermine my achievements or try to take advantage of me. I told my spouse how I felt. I explained that I understood her position, that I knew she didn't want to cause any more tension, but I also told her that I couldn't just throw away my principles. I asked her to understand that this was something I needed to do, not just for me, but for us. I wasn't trying to hurt her or her family, but I had to make a decision that felt right for me. If it meant facing their anger or disappointment, then so be it. There was a long silence after I spoke. I could see the weight of everything on her shoulders, but she finally said, "I understand, but this isn't going to be easy." And I knew she was right. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the right decision for me. In the end, I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I might regret it later. My self-respect had to come first. After everything settled down, I took a step back to reflect on what had just happened. It wasn't just about the prenup anymore. It was about how far I'd come as a person. The whole experience taught me some important lessons that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. First, I learned a lot about trust. Not just in other people, but in myself. When my in-laws pressured me into that prenup, I didn't trust my own judgment. I was worried about upsetting everyone, so I went along with it. But over time, I learned that trusting myself and believing in my worth is far more important than trying to please others. The second lesson was about self-worth. I spent years trying to prove that I could make something of myself, but deep down, I didn't always believe I was good enough. But after everything that happened, I realized that I didn't need anyone's approval. My success wasn't just a result of hard work. It was a reflection of my belief in myself. I wasn't just building a career. I was building my self-esteem. Lastly, this experience showed me the importance of standing by my values. It's easy to get caught up in what other people want from you. But if you don't stand firm in your beliefs, you end up losing who you are. I stood by the decision to keep the prenup, not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because I had to show myself that I was worthy of my success and that I deserved to protect everything I had worked for. Looking back, I see that the situation wasn't just about money or a piece of paper. It was about my journey. It was about growing stronger, learning to say no, and choosing my own path, no matter who disagreed with me. And sometimes, the tables turn in ways you never expect. You start off thinking you're weak or not good enough, and then in the end, you realize you are always worth it. So, here's my takeaway. Don't let anyone define your worth. Stand by your values, trust in yourself, and never let anyone make you feel small. You have everything you need within you to succeed.